Now, with the Obamacare replacement bill having done an epic faceplant, Republicans are hasty to move on to another piece of their legislative agenda. Now, this would be, of course, the budget. Oh boy. Now, a recently released draft budget set the stage for a potential $203 billion rollback of financial industry regulations, federal employee benefits, welfare spending, and more. So that's an overview of what's in the budget. Now, you might think, wait a minute, didn't the Republicans release a budget already? Well, Trump actually released a budget. The White House released a budget blueprint. So this is actually the House GOP's budget. So, and let me give you some of the details as evidence from the Washington Post. Now, the House plan envisions major cuts to federal spending over the coming decades, bringing the budget into balance by relying on what they say is accelerated economic growth to boost revenue. Laugh along with me. Now, under the House plan, they would actually increase spending on at least one thing. That would be defense spending. It would increase by over 10 years, while non-defense discretionary spending would actually decline to $424 billion, or 23% as to what it is today. So that non-defense discretionary spending, of course, that is where a lot of your welfare programs, things like food stamps, welfare, TANF, etc., right? So basically what they're doing is that they're doing the normal Trump plan, right? So let's put more money into the military and let's cut, Social Security, or not Social Security, food stamps, and all those other programs that people rely on. Now, speaking of programs that help the American people, there's Medicare and Social Security. Now, one reason that this plan is different than the Trump plan is that in the Trump plan, it didn't touch Social Security or Medicare. In this plan, the House GOP has drastic cuts to both programs. Now, interestingly enough, again, in Trump's proposal, he's like, no, I'm not going to cut Social Security and Medicare. I actually made a promise not to cut those. Now, take that as you will. We know Donald Trump is a huge liar. But on this issue, I mean, they released a budget that had no cuts in Social Security and Medicare. So are they going to reconcile that? I don't know. We'll have to see in the future. Now, the House plan also assumes an economic growth of 2.6% from all their cuts. Now, that exceeds the 1.9 figure used by the Congressional Budget Office, which is another reason that Republicans are like, let's get rid of the Congressional Budget Office. They keep giving us numbers that we don't like. First, they give us bad numbers on the health care bill. Then they're saying that our magical growth formula isn't going to work, and we're actually going to have slower growth, even though then in the Trump budget, they forecast a 3% growth to the economy. House GOP says, well, we got to be a little bit more realistic. 2.6. Whereas actually the CBO says 1.9. Okay. Now, because of that, we already know that the House GOP plan is also based on that same fake math. Now, like the earlier Trump plan, they basically want to cut taxes massively for the rich. In fact, the wealthiest will see a tax cut of about $940,000, while poor people get an average tax cut of about $40. Wow. Awesome. Now, that growth, as I said, is based on this math error. Republicans believe that if you cut taxes, you're going to see a lot of economic growth. You'll get so much growth, actually, that you will see more tax revenue. So we're going to cut taxes and somehow get more money. Hey, man, that's a Republican plan, right? Now, if that works, of course, then explain to me why growth has been very sluggish since, well, for a very long time, since we started really cutting taxes on corporations. Let me give you an example, right? That's very recent. President Obama. Now, President Obama has raised taxes in different areas, and of course, that's always a good thing when it comes to the massively low tax rates that we have right now, right? So he's raising taxes a little bit on the rich, generally very progressive. In fact, some of the tax increases in the ACA were actually very progressive. So they hit the rich much, much harder than it hit poor people. Now, despite that, President Obama, and something I criticize him for, is for keeping 97% of the Bush tax cuts. Those Bush tax cuts, well, look, you want to complain about the deficit. one of the biggest driver of this deficit, other than, of course, our unfunded wars, are the giant Bush tax cuts, which Obama kept 97% of them. Now, George W. Bush, see, these tax cuts, when he signed them, they had a sunset provision, right? So not even George W. Bush could keep them permanently. But here comes President Obama saying, no, I will keep those permanently. So there's that. And yet, under Obama, we've had growth, but it's been slow growth. I mean, you go on Fox News, they'll talk about, oh, the Obama economy, such slow growth. Well, actually, it's not a liberal economics at all. It's actually an effect of all these tax cuts and the fact that we, of course, have been in a recession and that we've been slowly climbing out of. Now, to be fair, that was the Bush recession that, we were put into. And that there were also some things like, for example, the Republicans blocked any more stimulus measures after the original one. And that's not on Obama. That's on the Republicans, of course. And that didn't help the growth situation. Perhaps if we had more stimulus, we might have actually been able to pick ourselves up a little bit. But also if we had things like a higher minimum wage, because we've had stagnant wages for over 30 years and stuff like that. So there's a lot of economic issues, some of which you can blame Obama on, and others you can point at Republican politicians and establishment politicians for not doing anything about and actually making worse. But the other thing I want to go to is, as far as growth goes, well, why can't the Republicans explain that at the biggest growth period in the United States, we had tax rates of over 90% on the highest earnings? Again, those were marginal rates, but nonetheless, for the richest people in America, over a certain amount of money would get taxed at 90%. And that was one of the most, one of the best periods in history for economic growth in America during the 50s and 60s. Yeah, you hear a lot of people saying, well, we want to make America great again. Well, that's a time where, at least economically, America was doing pretty great. Now, if you were a black person, or if you were a woman, wasn't so great, to be fair. Maybe that's the part that they actually want to go back to. But it's almost like their whole cutting taxes, and that'll create growth, massive growth, and will actually lead to more money. Maybe it doesn't work. I mean, I got another great example, and that's Kansas, right? Now, Kansas gave giant tax cuts to the rich and corporations. They cut taxes to the bone. And what happened? Well, they ended up having smaller growth compared to some of the nearby states who went in the opposite direction, and then ended up having giant deficits so bad that they had to cut education so much that the Supreme Court had to interfere and go, you have cut taxes, or you have cut education funding below a level that we will allow. We're going to have to ask you to put more money back in education. That is unconstitutional, how low you have your school funding. Doesn't seem like a ringing success. It's almost like we've tried it before, and it just didn't work, no matter what level we've done it at, with the state or local level. But I know, all we have to do is we just have to cut taxes more. That's the Republican plan, and it's reflected in this House budget. Now, of course, in order to get this passed, the tax bill drafted to comply with the House budget proposal would also have to include much more than just tax provisions, because what they want to do is they want to pass it through, of course, reconciliation, to make sure that they don't have to worry about those pesky Democrats and their filibuster. Now, the Ways and Means Committee, which is drafting the tax bill, would be instructed, because of this, the way that they have to get it passed, they would be instructed to find $52 billion in deficit savings over the next decade. House Speaker Paul Ryan and the panel's chairman, Kevin Brady, has said they intend to produce a deficit-neutral reform bill, meaning the savings would have to be found in other programs under the committee's jurisdiction. Now, what are these programs? This would be Medicare, disability aid, temporary assistance for needy families, and unemployment and compensation. So understand what they're doing. They've got to find $52 billion in savings over the next 10 years. Where are they going to go? They're going to all the programs that help regular people, that poor people, retired people, people who, have fallen on hard times, unemployment compensation, for people who lose their jobs and no fault of their own. So basically everything that helps regular American people, gone, cut. That's what they're doing. Again, notice how they always go to screwing over poor people in order to pass their giant tax cuts, which essentially this budget will do. Now, more cuts, right? The Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which has explored cuts to the federal workforce and federal employee benefits, would also be required to find additional $32 billion in deficit savings. And now we get to another part of the budget, and that has to do with regulation. The Financial Services Committee would be ordered to produce $14 billion in savings, a figure that could allow Republicans to repeal large parts of the Dodd-Frank financial reform law, something they've been after for a long time. Now, the Congressional Budget Office also found earlier this year that the Financial Choice Act, a Dodd-Frank repeal bill, passed by the House last month, would produce about $24 billion in deficit reduction over the next 10 years. So already they've hit their goal if they get rid of Dodd-Frank. Now, another committee, the Judiciary Committee, would also be responsible for $45 billion in deficit reduction, which is roughly the amount of savings produced under the Protecting Access to Care Act. Now, that is a medical malpractice reform bill that also passed the House last month. So they want to get rid of that. So make it so that you can't go after people who do medical malpractice on you. Well, but it's just for the savings. We got to have the savings, right? So, look, understand that those are some of the provisions in this new House GOP plan. Now, I say new, but actually it's the old plan. It's been the same old plan. Deregulate the banks, give the military more money, cut Social Security, cut Medicare, cut welfare, cut food stamps. So there's no way this is going to pass, right? This is such a terrible, this is an odious, grotesque bill. Will it pass? Assuming you believe in Donald Trump and his promise to leave Medicare and Social Security alone, okay, then it won't pass if it ever gets to his desk. And of course, with the infighting that Congress is having between some of the more moderate Republicans and some of the extreme right-wingers like the Freedom Caucus, well, that's also an issue. That some of these cuts may be seen as too inhumane for some of the more moderates to accept. We don't know. So it's really kind of up in the air. And as far as Trump goes, he's been known to change his mind. So we're going to have to see whether or not it makes it to the House floor, makes it to the Senate floor. Right now, we know since, the Obamacare repeal bill, Trump care fell flat on its face, that it's going to be a lot harder to get the political capital behind this bill to pass. But at the same time, I'm going to warn you, since this bill is based on punishing the poor and greed, never, ever, ever underestimate the greed of Republican politicians. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.